Hey, Dana Carvey in a dress. What are we going to talk about today?
Who was it? Who could it possibly be? Was it, oh, I don't know, Satan?
That's right. You got it in one go. Good for you. Well, it was close. I'm not talking about Satan himself or directly about Satanism. This is a video specifically about, well, the effects on American society when a sudden influx of propaganda and fear of Satanism came into play, and how terror-mongering led to a lot of frightened parents and confused children getting saturated in the dread of the ever-present hand of a malevolent infernal fiend, very little of which turned out to be true. By the way, this is the third Yells at Cloud released, and the first that's not about something I remember fondly. I started out intending this as a series about stuff I liked, but really, it's going to be whatever perks my interest to make a video about, with a heavy slant towards my own nostalgia, of course. Also, please note that, if this kind of thing matters to you, I do not, at any point, mock God, Jesus, or the concept of faith. Yes, I point and laugh, and I admit I mock what I see as extremist words and behavior, but at no point do I wish to imply that this stuff applies to the whole mass of people of faith as they are today. Thank you. On with the show. The movement that would become known as the Satanic Panic got its start way back in the 1970s. It didn't really hit a fever pitch till we got into the 80s, but generally the roots of this sensationalism are believed to have originated around this book called The Satan Seller. Mike Warnke's story about how he grew up an orphan and was led into joining the ranks of Satanism. The book was quite lurid, detailing orgies, drug use, and his rise to power within the hierarchy of the Satanic Church, until he grew disillusioned with it all, went on to become a hero in Vietnam, became a Christian, and went on to live happily ever after. It became a bestseller and launched Warnke into prominence in religious circles. Well, right up until one thing after another, pretty much everything he said and wrote were debunked, with evidence. But it was too late. The fear of cults seducing innocent children into the service of a dark lord and master were sown in the minds of the public. Sadly, his turnaround was only temporary, and Warnke was, in addition to being a lying BS artist, also still a criminal, and his ministry closed its doors under crippling debt and proof of mishandling of funds. These seeds of doubt blossomed into a full-blown moral panic in 1980 when a new book telling tales of innocent minors lured and coerced into taking part in occult rituals came to the light. In this case, Michelle Remembers, written by Michelle Smith, later Michelle Pazder after she left her husband to marry the therapist who helped her write this book. Well, Michelle was undergoing therapy, and she was able to recover these memories of satanic ritual abuse that had been so horrible she had, until then, suppressed them in her memory. These horrific stories of a young girl caged, smeared with the blood of murder victims, forced to commit ritual murder herself, made to go to the bathroom on Bibles and crosses, locked in mausoleums and cages full of snakes, and had a tail and horns surgically grafted to her, all the while being raped and abused, until the cult just let her go for no clear reason. It made for excellent headlines and gripping drama, but once again, bit by bit, everything was debunked, and by the time all of this came to light years later, the damage was done, and many, many people had read the book and taken it to heart. After a while, Michelle herself was not allowed to talk to the investigators looking into the claims of the book. In many cases, her therapist, now husband, claimed it would be too hard on her to dredge it up again, and did all the talking himself. But hey, there are always other people to ask, like her father. That hateful waste of print broke the poor man's heart, and he all but called her a monster for spreading hateful lies about her poor deceased mother. Friends, neighbors, and people who went to school with Michelle all confirmed the book was utter gargle-mash, and that the girl's mother was a loving, kind parent who would never give her daughter over to Satanists. Lies, lies, and more lies. The book, for example, claimed she was denied religion in her upbringing. They went to church every Sunday. It also claimed she was poisoned. There was a poisoning incident, but no one did it to her. The young Michelle just drank a paint turpentine mixture that had been left out. And so on. Pretty much every aspect of the account not only false, but angering and offensive to everyone who really knew this deceitful scam artist back in childhood. A childhood that I will add includes pictures. Photos both personal and school events in yearbook, even during the year she was supposedly a prisoner of the cult with grafted-on horns. More and more the story fell apart, but again, these interviews and discoveries did not come to light till years later, And even then, the story has die-hard supporters utterly convinced that Old Scratch himself had a hand in the exposure, and that he used his spooky devil magic to destroy all the evidence that would have proved she was telling the truth. One thing the book did do for certain was trigger countless imitators, with scores of people suddenly remembering horrendous tortures inflicted on them in childhood that they had repressed in their memory for years, and they were more than willing to go on the TV box and discuss it with everybody watching. Or, write their own books to sell you. Thousands of cases. This epidemic the media was all too happy to spread and encourage, all without a shred of evidence beyond the testimonies of the opportunistic. As the madness spread, it built momentum, word going faster and faster as more media sources caught on that this was the next big attention getter. And most of the big names in news and talk show media had one or more episodes devoted to the topic, from an expose on 2020 to Oprah, Sally Jesse Raphael, and many, many others jumping on the bandwagon. The whole thing coming to a head in '88, when then-famous TV personality Geraldo Rivera produced a hastily put together and shoddily researched 2-hour-long documentary on the Satanic menace. Rivera interviewed members of the Church of Satan, religious figures, and rock legend Ozzy Osbourne, among others. He claimed there were millions of satanic cult members all over the country, practicing their murders and rituals in secret, and they were so good at covering their tracks, there was just never any evidence. But really, they were totally there, honest. This show was, at the time, the most viewed documentary ever published on NBC, but while the viewing public lapped it up, many other news outlets called it sloppy, sensationalistic, and trash journalism, to the point that, years later, Geraldo was called on to apologize for his contribution to what was, by that point, practically a modern witch-burning. The infiltrating presence of Satanism was everywhere, according to the media, and this fueled paranoia and panic among many Americans, with the occult being suspected and blamed for almost every crime and disturbance you could care to name. Because what would have once been described by the media as generic vandals and hooligans were now clearly organized and guided by the unseen Satanic Church. Unseen and unnamed, it would seem, because despite the outrageous claims made by these so-called satanic ritual experts that there were millions of practicing Satanists in the country, they could never provide any actual evidence or sources for these numbers, and more scientific researchers put the number closer to 100,000. These cultists were supposedly the most secretive and successful organization in the history of all criminals, their sinister fingers in every pie, from robbery, rape, and murder to vehicular homicide against small animals. Seriously, one of these scare reports suggested that the dead animals seen on the side of the road, or on the road, were run over deliberately by drug-addled sadists committing murder in the name of Lucifer with their car, and that many cases of roadkill should be considered sacrifices. The biggest target, of course, for these omnipresent Satanists was America's youth, the children. The precious, innocent, defenseless little ones were just what the devil wanted. For as everyone knows, a runny-nosed 5-year-old bouncing around on a Saturday morning sugar high from breakfast cereal is totally the best choice for an evil minion. But those darn parents, they keep close watch over their children, making it so hard to snap them up and indoctrinate them with evil ways. So how would old Fire and Brimstone Pants work his sinister mojo on the children? Through toys, music, books, and favorite TV shows, of course. Oh, boys and girls at home, you wouldn't believe how much evil and occult imagery was used in every popular cartoon of the time. No, seriously, you won't believe it. A list that almost assured nearly every parent in the country would gasp in horror and freak out because little Johnny or little Susie watched one or more of those shows. And to make matters worse, they had piles and piles of the toys based off those shows, and thus attracted a lot more viewers and attention when they targeted those properties. Here, just listen to the sheer higgledy-piggledy of it.
You know, I received this letter. I thought I might read it here. A lady had written to the Eagle's Nest, and she said, "How harmless are the cartoon characters on the Masters of the Universe program for children? My sister-in-law allows her son to watch this television show, and he also has all the characters, He-Man, Skeletor, who you see on the screen right now, and the Castle of Grayskull, to which this little 2-year-old boy repeats from the show, by the power of Grayskull." Here's a little boy repeating, 2 years old, by the power of Grayskull, and she says he holds his hand up, saluted to the sky. So a 2-year-old is actually learning these things. Well,
Gonna stop you right there, Chief. Alright, while the symbology behind it may still bother you with the sword or without it, he is not saluting the sky. He is mimicking what the character on the TV show does, holding up a sword, etc., etc. The quotations may bother you, but you're bringing in a salute, which implies reverence to some being that does not exist. Alright, continue.
The Bible says, dear children, let nothing take God's place in your hearts.
Right.
And He-Man is being lifted up as a God, and many children are receiving him as such. In fact, I was talking to one lady, and I've heard a number of experiences like this, but she said, my little boy was in the back seat of the car, and a radio preacher came on and said, our Lord God, the master of the universe. And her boy jumped from the back seat of the car and said, Mommy, God isn't master of the universe, He-Man is.
Okay, you are taking seriously what a child small enough to stand in the back seat says. Alright, first of all, why isn't he belted in? But this was the 80s, no children's car seats, etc., etc., so you get a pass there. But he is a little child. They say random things. They see the thing on the TV and they get all excited. They have not learned what you say and do not say. Alright. Anyway, and also, in all the stories of all the non-believers and atheists I've ever heard of, I have never come across a story that says, well, the reason I don't believe is because of He-Man. Anyway, go ahead.
what? A little boy said that He-Man is the master of the universe?
Oh, even more so. I've got another one. My dad was talking about my presentation in a church, and a little boy was seen afterwards. I mean, I didn't even do the presentation. And afterwards, he was seen in the parking lot. Now, this is a kid growing up in a Christian home, going to church, Sunday school, the whole shot.
Right.
Out in the parking lot with He-Man in his hand, running around in circles saying, He-Man has more power than Jesus. He-Man has more power than Jesus.
So,
Do any of your stories not rely on the doings of, like, preschoolers? Yeah. At the very worst, the kid may have been saying something he knew would get his parents riled up and get attention. You can't really pin satanic influence on a small child who has seen He-Man, you know, throw boulders, stop monsters, defeat evil wizards. He's seen him do all that. I don't think, you know, there's not really many action-adventure sequences of God. I'm just saying, at that age, he has seen heroics one way and only been told about other good things. So don't pin it on the child.
it's Skeletor now. We've got him up on our screen, and Skeletor is this ugly-looking skeletal creature.
His face is bone, but the rest of him is in no way skeletal. He has lots of blue flesh and muscle. Just nitpicking at this point, sorry.
With a staff in his hand. Now, what's that staff that he's got in his hand?
The staff is a ram's head staff. Now, the ram's head is a very occultic symbol. It's boiled.
Okay, occultic, not a word. And also, in the show, it was called his Havoc staff. But I will actually give you a point here. Point on the board. Good for you. Using the goat's head is, at worst, it's waving a red flag, because it is a symbol in Christian mythology as demonic. That is the only begrudging point I think I will be giving you, because I don't think your hit record is so good so far. Alright.
When I was brought up, I watched cartoons like Bugs Bunny, Donald Duck, Daffy Duck, I mean, Elmer Fudd, and all of the Looney Tunes. But today, there's a different kind of cartoon that's coming on our TV sets, and the question is there a well-organized plot, an insidious design right now to program and influence the minds of our children towards the occult and witchcraft?
Or is it just possibly maybe that trends in entertainment change, and what was popular once, like, say, detective movies or cowboy shows, is no longer what people want to watch? That could be it. Could be.
All this stuff links together, because when a child watches the cartoon, they no longer, as we said in the first show, project themselves with their imagination into the toy and give it life, character, abilities, and talents and set the surrounding around it. They've been programmed by the cartoon to play with the toy in a certain manner. And so if the cartoon says that a character has occult powers, then when the child plays with the toy, he is going to use that toy to cast spells or do whatever the toy does in the cartoon. And so he's programmed to play with the toy in a certain manner.
Well, let's take a toy, for instance.
Wow. He makes pretend that the toy acts the way it does on the show. Sounds so sinister when you wrap it up in those particular words. Yeah, just because you can write scary stories does not mean you're right.
Well, it's direct link to the occult and pagan religion again. And we saw in there that She-Ra was sent to the 6th dimension. We're talking about Eastern religion. I mean, everything that has taken its basis from Hinduism and other religions like that has been added into our toys and cartoons these days.
No.
Yeah, no. Bad ban. No cookie for Phil. The 6th dimension does not necessarily have anything to do with any religion or concept other than I was lazy, I made up a dimension, and I didn't even bother to name it. I numbered it. All right, go ahead. Proceed.
You talk about Hinduism. Would we see anything like the martial arts or, you know, yoga exercises? Well, we did see yoga exercises last week in Skeletor taking that position. Let's go on to Thundercats for a moment, because I believe there's something to do with the martial arts in the Thundercats series.
Yes, they are involved in the martial arts. They're also half men, half lion. Again, the beast-man combination, much like many of the gods of the ancients were half men, half beast, or hybrids. These are half men, half lions. And they do things like communicate with the dead and have occult powers themselves.
So
I'm going to go ahead and stop you right there. They go on to actually show a clip of the Thundercats. I'm not going to do so because I don't want to invite the wrath of toy companies or cartoon companies that license toy licenses. Anyway, or the people that own those licenses, even though they had nothing to do with creating the show. Anyway, the point is, not showing clips. But martial arts was really a bad word for these guys during this era. Apparently it led to Eastern religion automatically. You just took up following the ancients or whatever they believed you would be corrupted by if you started studying martial arts, karate, judo, anything. All right, go ahead. Take it away.
Well, let's tie this up today. I know some of you parents that are watching are already saying, I can't believe it. I let my children watch this on Saturday morning and on the weekdays, and they're totally involved with these characters. They act like them. I tell you what, you have a responsibility as a parent to stop the children from having these toys, from watching these cartoons, and we'll share later how you're responsible for that child. In the name of Jesus, I break every stronghold, and I command that Satan loses hold upon your household, and I praise God for it. Amen. See you next.
Through different situations.
I will snark and I will make comments, but I do not usually take direct jabs at faith itself. But what you are saying, Mr. Third Runner-Up in a Ron Jeremy lookalike contest, is complete damaging garbage. Because of you, a lot of lives got messed up, a lot of children were not allowed to play with a lot of toys, and beyond that, to some degree, some took it even further and punished their children, little children mind you, if they were caught pretending to be a horsey or pretending to be a kitty. This kind of thing led to punishments out of nowhere, even if that punishment was just the taking of a favorite toy. The toys are not evil, although that is my opinion, and you're welcome to yours. Anyway, on with it.
Well, let's go from there. We're talking about humanistic type of toys. Let's go into the more blatantly occultic things.
Yeah.
Occultic is not a word. They say it over and over again, both of them. It's like dozens of times throughout this special. It just keeps happening. It's not a word. All right, keep going.
I remember a couple years ago I preached a message for television called Dungeons and Dragons, and in it I dealt with the occultic overtones, the witchcraft, the demonism, the spells, that were perpetrated through the game Dungeons and Dragons, and I felt at the time that children were identifying so closely with those little pieces in the game that we even had newspaper clippings of children that had dropped out. Some they thought had even committed suicide because of the game, and even more has come to light since then. And I wanted to show a clip from Dungeons and Dragons right now showing the occultic overtones of the game. So here's from the cartoon show that's now come from the game. Here.
All right. They may be willing to show a clip from Dungeons and Dragons cartoon. I am not. I do not want to invite the wrath of lawyers. Anyway, keep going.
Quote from the pit of hell, if you want to call it that. It is a mind-bending game, a mind-changing game. It is involved with all kinds of occult and pagan religion. The player's handbook includes over 160 pages of spells to be cast.
Let's look at one of the handbooks here. This is the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, the Monster Manual. And it's full of monstrous figures and actually those creatures that the children can imagine. And children's imaginations are very active, aren't they?
That is what the monster manuals are for. It's the title of the book. It is a listing of monsters. The other books are not a listing of monsters. Some are adventures, some are new rules. The thing is, D&D and by proxy all other role-playing games came under heavy fire in the 80s. This touches a personal note with me, and I will go into more detail on that in a future video, but for now, we will move on.
This is where we go into the Dungeon Master's Guide. Who is the Dungeon Master?
Well, the Dungeon Master is a person who plays God in the game. And he controls all the situations. In fact, the books tell him that he is the god of the game. And
actually, sir, no. The Dungeon Master decides what the gods in the game do. I'm sure that's not good news for some of you, but it is a clarification. All right, moving forward.
I did my message, and this has happened. I have letter after letter where people took the pieces. Now, there's sixes involved in the pieces of the game, but they take the pieces of the game, they would throw them in the incinerator or the fireplace, and screams would come out because there seemed to be some kind of spiritual forces inhabiting those pieces, and children would drop out of life. They didn't want to study anymore.
Yeah, I got nothing. The man just said he believes reports that when the little D&D minifigures are thrown into the fire, they scream. I don't think anything I can say at this point will make that any more funny.
Cassette, this is a letter that came from a lady that had heard my cassette on Dungeons and Dragons, and she just mentions how it changed the personality of her young boy. She says, the cassette from the Eagle's Nest especially helped me with my boy who was involved with D&D at a private high school which promoted D&D as part of their attractive strategic game club. She says, for a period of about 6 months, we lost Tonio, our son. He became rebellious, disrespectful, lethargic. He made sneering faces at us and carried with him a very hostile spirit that could be felt wherever he went in the...
Okay, he was being a teenager. Seriously, that is a phase that 90% of teenagers go through. They get sullen, they get disrespectful of parents and authority, and they're trying to figure out who the hell they are and what they're doing with life, and it's confusing, overwhelming, and it can make them surly. That is being a teenager, for the love of... Ugh. Proceed.
In the house. After much sorrow, Tonio finally let go of D&D, only after his father forbid the game as his day's pastime. He couldn't make it his day's pastime. She said he had put aside all studies for this game. Now, I want to say that the reason the danger comes into this is that not only is it a game now, but the cartoons, which the children even identify more strongly with.
All right, I'm going to stop you again right there. Becoming obsessed over anything, from World of Warcraft to D&D to books to movies to anything, is the road to madness, or at least a sign of madness. Chicken egg sort of thing. Anyway, point is, no, this is not the evil of the game. Irrational people will focus on something, and there is no way to predict what it is. If there was a rational way to predict that, it wouldn't be called insanity. All right, keep going. You can't dig yourself much deeper.
Here, which we found in the store called a sectors. warriors of Symbion, and it says, now the battle is in your hands. Very interesting. Can they see that? Let me take this out of the box, and I'll show you that it actually does some tricks. Now this is where a child can identify with this and actually take this out of the box and put it on his hand, no less. So let me see if I can put my hand in here. Oh no. Unbelievable. Get my fingers in the different glove parts here, and then this creature actually begins to open its mouth and move its legs. Isn't that incredible? And
so they can make it take on life.
It says here that it actually makes the wings move, so let me look at that. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, I know, they're trying to vilify this thing, but even when he's sitting there talking down about it, it's awesome. I want one. That is an awesome toy. All right, keep going.
And do you remember those verses in the book of Revelation about the flying beast with the riders on them?
The flying beast with the riders on them. So
the winged horses.
This could actually be taken from Revelations.
Sure, it looks like it.
Oh, let me get this straight if I'm interpreting your moon logic correctly. All mounted riders on flying creatures of any sort whatsoever are forbidden in all fantasy because of it being in the last book of the Bible. Not questioning the Bible, I'm just saying you're not copying the Bible by having things riding winged creatures. Thank you. Keep going.
Now I think a lot of this can even go back, if we might divert, back to some of the movies that have been coming out, like Star Wars and the Jedi, Return of the Jedi. And
oh man, do not tick off the Star Wars fans. I am warning you. That is not a road you want to go down. Oh, keep going.
So forth. What is this creature we're looking at on our screen from...
Well, this is Squidhead. He's from Star Wars. And as you know, Star Wars told us that the Force would be with us. And of course, the Force is a word used by witches down through the centuries to describe the power they receive from Satan.
It's also a very common word used to describe power of any kind. It is not just because it comes from witchcraft. Seriously. It also comes from physics. Did physics draw the word force from witchcraft? I don't think so. Carry on. You're going to say something else stupid, aren't you?
Characters like Darth Vader, who look almost exactly like the ancient Norse god Odin.
Odin. Does that look like any interpretation of Odin anywhere? Ever? All right, moving on. Please let this end soon.
And Obi-Wan Kenobi, and there's a form of witchcraft called Obi-witchcraft, in which chanting Obi, Obi, Obi over and over again releases the power into the witches' lives.
You're saying that these were actually taken, this was taken from a Norse god who looked very much like him?
Yes, it looks a lot like Darth Vader.
Darth Vader's armor was based off of samurai armor, not of anything Nordic of any variety. All right. Continue.
I wish we could go back one slide and look at that Norse god, but we can't go backward on these? Okay.
We're looking at Yoda right now, and Yoda was called the Zen Master. Of course, this was based on Zen Buddhism. Zen Buddhism says there's one force in the world, and it can be either used for good or evil. And Yoda's called the Zen Master. He's always seen with serpents around him or serpents around his neck.
Look at the serpents around his neck there.
He is a three-fingered, three-toed beast. So he has the 2 fingers and the thumb, which from my information means Satan is Lord.
Right. Now, let's take it up right now with...
All right, they are picking on the shape of Yoda's hands. Apparently, Yoda's hands with 3 fingers are throwing up the devil horns. You know what? No. I'm done. Keep going. Carry on.
Another creature by Steven Spielberg, I believe it is, from E.T.
He's not. He's not going after E.T.
The extraterrestrial. What can we say about him?
Well, E.T. smashed box office records in 1982 by doing $318 million.
$318 million.
Yes, it was a camouflage occult movie including levitation, psychic healing, mind control, mental telepathy, that type of thing. E.T. also included some inferences to homosexuality within the movie.
Homosexuality.
Yes.
This creature.
I am aware of the degree of sound desync from the image in this clip. I apologize for it, but what's more important is what's being said. Anyway, continue, guys.
Yes.
And levitation ability, and he just brought all of this into the minds and thinking of the children. Would we say this is a plot to...
Well, I think one of the things they tried to do on this movie is to make people accept that there's more Christ than just one. You know, many times that the Hindus, and they believe that there's a multiples of Christ, and they come at different occasions and different times. And so I think that's what happened in this movie. It was a falsification of Christ coming to earth and trying to get us to believe that, hey, you know, if E.T.'s an alien and he came down and he did all the things that he did and he died and was resurrected again, then what about Jesus? Maybe he was an alien.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's what they were going for. You can get that out of it if that's what you want to, but I watched this when I was like 6 or 7, and I never thought of it that way until I heard someone explain it that way. Someone like you, actually. Anyway, anything else?
Well, anything occultic or dangerous about Smurfs?
Not a word!
Well, Smurfs happens to be the most popular Saturday morning cartoon since the Bugs Bunny Roadrunner hour. It's just entered into a long-term run, and it's hit an hour and a half on Saturday morning cartoons. But there are some things about Smurfs that we need to look at. First of all, you'll notice that they're depicted as blue with black lips.
Well, isn't that interesting?
And you know what happens to you when you die? You turn blue and your lips turn black.
In other words, these are depictive of dead creatures.
Okay, you are seriously grasping at straws at this point. That is idiotic. Besides, you claim to be talking about the show, and you hold up little plastic dolls with black painted lips to indicate where the mouths are. The characters in the show did not have black lips. Dead people. I see dead... What the... Go on.
Right. And another thing is that Smurfs is an all-male community. And you say, oh, there's Smurfette. She's a female. Well, in one cartoon, she was depicted as transforming from a male to a female.
Yeah, I'm not going to want to hear your opinions on transgenderism. Move on. Yeah, that was... yeah, that's enough of that. It keeps going on like that for an hour and a half or more. Sweet Bill Nye in a bunny costume. I have had to watch so much brain rot drivel in researching this video. This is not normal. This is not rational. This is insane. Cuckoo pants. This is not what normal religious people believe. I had a close friend in the son of a preacher of the church when I was little. The church we attended. I was really young, and he and I watched the same shows. We had so many of the same toys, He-Man action figures in particular, and his parents never bought into this codswaddle. I repeat, this is not how rational people think. This was purely opportunistic, greedy attention whores, fabricating a threat they could save people from and attract attention and sales for their warning videos, telling the masses what else was evil. Oh, and of course to get donations. So many donations from people who had no idea the shows and toys were evil until that information was spoon-fed to them by these so-called experts. And did you notice anything about those clips, by the way? Specifically, the shows mentioned? He-Man, Smurfs, Star Wars, and the like? All some of the most hugely popular shows of the time. So big, so famous, most kids today have at least heard of them, even if it's just in internet memes. Funny how that worked out, huh? It's almost as if they knew they wouldn't reach and impact as many people if they went after shows that weren't so prevalent. That, or it turns out the demonically influenced media were the only ones that reached the top, and the other shows that would fizzle and die from lack of notice were safe and did not bear mention. No, the thing is, they targeted the shows and movies with the most wide audience, so they were more likely to make the parents of the most children cringe because their beloved darling watched that show and listened to that music. Oh yeah, music too. I'll get to that in more detail later. I know it sounds hard to believe, especially for people born after it was over or in other countries where they're a little more rational about this kind of thing. I can hear it now.
Usopp, old bean. Generally I'm inclined to take you at face value, you being a consummate fool and whatnot, but in this case I find it a bit hard to swallow. This appears to be, on the surface at least, complete balderdash. We still have the kind of nutcakes that you're talking about, on TV and YouTube and whatnot, but most people seem to write them off, except for maybe the most fundamental of fundamentalists. They aren't really anything to worry about, are they?
Yeah, well, let's back up a little further and look more into this. Forgive me for a seemingly unrelated side tangent, but dissociative identity disorder. Back in those days, still called multiple personality disorder. In 1970, there were fewer than 200 cases of this mental illness worldwide. Then a huge hit book was turned into a movie came out called Sybil, about a woman suffering from many identities in her head. It was hugely popular, widely seen, and by 1984, suddenly over 1,000 cases were reported in America alone. Aliens too, by the way. Decades too, little green men were reported by lone travelers all over America. But when the portrayal of the black-eyed Greys became more popular in TV and films, well, guess what alien sightings tended to get reported more and more? Go on, guess. Anyway, back on topic. Before the Satanic Panic, back in the early days of the 60s, a poll revealed that 37% of U.S. citizens believed in an actual, physically present devil on Earth. Well, manifest, not necessarily physically present, but spreading evil and corrupting the innocent. But then, in 1968, a movie called Rosemary's Baby took the country by storm, and following on its heels a few years later came a little film called The Exorcist in '73. By 1974, the number of people who believed the devil walks among us increased sharply to over 50%, as the scary movies people watched seemed to bleed over into their perceptions of reality once more, and more people were afraid of the big, bad red guy. Add to this the rise of televangelism, and I want to pause here to say that the advent of these ministries is not necessarily a bad thing, even if there were many prominent cases of abuse of power. Many of them are genuine, caring preachers who use the medium of television to spread the word and love of their God to the American populace. Most of them are awesome people, and I won't say a word against them or their drive to do good. But sadly, there are always bad apples in every group, and some of these were bigoted, fear-mongering scam artists, bilking the trusting flocks for millions and finding new and creative ways to scam the generosity of mankind and abuse their role and power to feed their lust for attention and, well, lusty things. Names like Pat Robertson, Jerry Falwell, and Jim Baker, just to name a few. All publicly revealed and shamed for their thieving and lecherous ways, their names became synonymous for corruption and deceit within the church. But, before they were revealed for their crimes, they managed to do so much damage, because they saw the rising fear of Satan's influence, and they fed the flames, pulling threats and terrifying statistics out of their butts in the names of shocking and intimidating the gullible and trusting, assuring them sensation and a growing base of regular watchers waiting to hear more of the menace and the cults of evil followers. Oh, and if any viewers are offended by me calling these people the names I did, don't worry. God forgave them for the lies, the theft, the power-tripping, the illicit affairs, and in some cases, resultant bastard offspring thereof. He totally did. They said so themselves. And he must have, as several of them are still in the air, bringing in even more money than they were before, and attracting huge swaths of eager believers waiting to be healed and cleansed. So, they're not really suffering, and a few mean words from a self-professed idiot and clown on the internet are not going to get to them.
I am a genius! Woo! I am an idiot. I am an idiot. Oh, that didn't kill me. Ow!
See? Total idiot. Okay, I've been going on longer than intended, and I still haven't covered anywhere near everything I need to. It looks like this is going to be part 1 of 2, or maybe several, but I'm going to wrap things up for now. I want to keep the overall Yells at Cloud series more or less in bite-sized, easily, casually watchable chunks. Please stay tuned, however, as I have much more I want to cover. Hidden messages backmasked into music, nightmarish propaganda mini-comic books, the insurgence of attacks on RPGs, Chuck Norris molestation allegations. Note, they were utterly and completely fabricated. Mr. Norris is still kick-ass in his opposite of edgy, non-mainstream threatening way as ever. The West Memphis 3, Anton LaVey, and so much more. Be with us next time, and I'll prattle on about more bizarre aspects of this strange little chunk of American history, and more examples of how when enough people spread falsehoods, no matter how incomprehensible and far-fetched it may seem, large masses of people will eventually accept it, especially when it comes from supposedly legitimate news sources. And the fallout that resulted from that hurt many people in many ways. Good night, YouTube. I'll see you next time.